The one who walks away without a word is not broken. They have simply become unbreakable. I am Friedrich Nietzsche, and I want to speak to you today, not as a ghost from a dusty philosophy book, but as a voice that has been waiting inside you, patient, watching, waiting for this exact moment, when you are finally ready to hear what you already know. You have been quiet for a long time, not weak, quiet. There's a difference so vast between those two things that most people spend their entire lives confusing them, and that confusion costs them everything. I once wrote that the strength of a person is not measured by what they endure, but by what they no longer consent to endure. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I believe you have lived long enough to know exactly what I mean. Think about a time in your life, maybe recently, maybe years ago, when you were in a room, maybe your own kitchen, maybe a conference room at a job you gave 30 years of your life to, maybe at a holiday dinner table, surrounded by the people you raised and loved, and something was said to you or about you or done in front of you that made something inside you go very still. Not angry, not tearful, still, like a deep lake when the wind suddenly stops. And you didn't explode. You didn't argue. You didn't chase the moment down the hallway, demanding an apology that was never coming. You went quiet. Maybe you set down your fork. Maybe you folded your hands. Maybe you just looked at the window for a second longer than usual. And then at some point you walked away. Not stormed, not slammed, walked. And I want to ask you something sincerely. What did people say about that? Did they call it maturity? Or did someone, maybe someone close to you, interpret your silence as defeat? Did they think they won? Did they tell others you had nothing to say? That you backed down? That you gave up? And here is the deeper question. Did any part of you believe them? Because if you did, even for a night, even while staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, wondering if you should have said more, fought harder, stayed longer, made your case one more time, then that is exactly why I am here speaking to you right now. Because what happened in that room was not weakness. What happened in that room was one of the most sophisticated acts of human resolve that most people alive will never fully understand. I spent my life studying human nature, the will to power, the eternal conflict between what men pretend to be and what they actually are. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the loudest person in any argument is almost never the strongest. Loudness is desperation wearing a costume. The person who raises their voice, who presses harder, who refuses to let the moment end, who needs the last word the way a drowning man needs air, that person is not powerful. That person is terrified. They are terrified that if the conversation ends without them winning it, they will cease to matter. Their identity lives in dominance and performance and the reactions of others. Strip away the audience and they collapse. But the quiet one, the one who walks away, that person's identity lives somewhere else entirely. It lives inside. It lives in what I called the will to power in its truest, most misunderstood form, not the power over others, but the power over oneself. The power to decide what deserves your energy and what does not. The power to recognize that not every battlefield is worth your blood. You have lived long enough. You are in your 50s, your 60s, perhaps your 70s, and you have seen enough of life to know that most of the battles people fight at dinner tables and in parking lots and over text messages cost them far more than any victory could ever return. You gave your working years to companies that restructured you away without a second thought. You gave your patience to relationships that took it without ever once acknowledging it. You gave your voice to conversations that were never actually listening. And at some point, something in you shifted. Something ancient and honest and deeply self-respecting said enough. Not out of bitterness, not out of resignation, out of clarity. That shift, that moment when a person stops performing for the crowd and starts living by an internal standard. That is what I called the revaluation of value. And it is the most important philosophical event that can happen in a human life. Most people never get there. They keep dancing to music they don't even like, chasing approval from people they don't even respect, defending themselves to audiences who are never going to be convinced anyway. They are trapped in what I call the herd mentality, not because they are stupid, but because the social pressure to conform, to explain, to justify, to fight back on terms that others have set is almost overwhelming. It takes something extraordinary to step outside of that pressure and say, quietly, with no audience, with no applause, I know what I am. I know what this is, and I am done. Think about the people in your life you have respected most deeply. Not the loudest ones. Not the ones who always had a comeback. Not the ones who made sure everyone in the room knew their opinion. Think about the ones who carried themselves with a kind of quiet gravity. The ones who, when they spoke, you listened. Not because they demanded it, but because they had earned it through years of living truthfully. Those people knew something. They knew that dignity is not negotiated. It is not won in arguments. It cannot be given to you by someone else's acknowledgement. Dignity is something you carry like a spine, invisibly, structurally, quietly. And when you compromise it by staying in rooms where it is not honored, you don't gain anything. You lose the one thing that actually holds you upright. I want to speak to something very specific about the stage of life you are in right now, because I think it is profoundly important and deeply underestimated. You are at an age where American culture does not quite know what to do with you. You are not young enough to be celebrated as potential, and not old enough to be romanticized as wisdom. You may have left careers that defined you for decades and discovered that without that title, the phone stops ringing. You may have poured yourself into raising children who are now adults, living their own lives, and felt the particular ache of that distance. You may be in a marriage or a long friendship that has changed so much. You sometimes wonder if you are living beside a stranger. You may have watched your body change, your circle shrink, your certainty about the future become something much more honest and much more immediate. These are not small things. These are the great, difficult, beautiful passages of a human life. And the temptation in these passages is enormous. The temptation to explain yourself, to prove yourself, to fight for recognition, to demand that people see your value, to stay in situations that diminish you, because at least staying feels like you still matter. I understand that temptation, but I want to tell you something that I believe with everything I was, and am the person who walks away from what diminishes them is not the person who has given up on life. They are the person who is finally, fully committed to it. Commitment to your own life means choosing what enters it. It means recognizing that your remaining years, your remaining energy, your remaining attention, these are not infinite. And they are sacred. Every hour you spend defending yourself to someone who has already decided what they think of you is an hour you did not spend building something that actually matters to you. Every conversation you stay in past the point where it stopped. Being honest is a conversation that is slowly teaching you to doubt your own perception. Every relationship you maintain past the point where it cost you. Your peace is a relationship that is quietly convincing you that peace is something you do not deserve. And you do deserve it. Not because life is easy or because you are without flaw. I certainly would never tell you that. But because you have done the hard work of living. You have made mistakes and carried them. You have loved people who were difficult to love. You have shown up on mornings when showing up took everything you had. That is not nothing. That is the full weight of a human life, and it deserves to be honored first by you, and only then by anyone else. The walk away is not the end of the story. It is the moment the real story begins. When you stop spending your strength on what is behind you and turn your full, clear-eyed attention toward what is still possible. That is when you become, in my deepest and most earnest understanding, a free human being. Not free from responsibility. Not free from love or connection or effort. Free from the tyranny of other people's definitions of you. Free from the need to be understood by everyone in order to know yourself. Free from the exhausting performance of justifying your choices to an audience that was never really watching. You only watching themselves through you. I wrote once that one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. And what I meant by that is not disorder or confusion. I meant the raw, honest, unresolved interior life of a person who has not yet settled into comfortable numbness. The person who has not yet decided that nothing new is possible. You still have that. I am certain of it, because you are here listening. And the person who has truly given up does not listen for truth. They have already decided there is none. You have not decided that. You are still asking the deep questions. You are still feeling the sting of being misread. You are still capable of being moved by the possibility that your life is not finished, becoming what it was always meant to be. That is not the profile of someone who is done. That is the profile of someone who is just beginning the most important and most personal chapter. The chapter where you stop building your life according to the blueprint other people handed you and start building it according to the one that has been forming inside you for years, quiet and sure and waiting. So when someone mistakes your silence for surrender, let them. When someone interprets your departure as defeat, let them carry that interpretation. It belongs to them, not to you. You know what you are. And if you have forgotten, let me remind you, you are someone who has lived through enough to know the difference between what is worth fighting for and what is not. That knowledge is rare. That knowledge is hard won. That knowledge is the beginning of true philosophical courage. Not the courage to fight everything, but the courage to choose your battles with such precision that every remaining fight is one that is genuinely worth everything you have. Walk away from what diminishes you. Walk toward what calls to the deepest and most honest version of yourself. Do it quietly. Do it with your spine straight and your hands unclenched and your eyes open. That is not weakness. That is resolve in its purest and most undefeatable form. And I am telling you, as someone who spent his entire life studying what makes a human being truly free, that resolve, quiet and certain and yours alone, is the most powerful thing you will ever carry.